I have always found readings from the book of Revelation to be challenging. The imagery and the meaning of the visions are at times obscure and confusing. Sometimes one will be even what I think it would be fair to call weird. Also, to be honest, they've been used by Christians to make all sorts of fantastical claims about what's about to happen and to find ways to claim a special hidden knowledge of the truth in the future. Which is why, when I find a reading from Revelation in the lessons for the day, I usually turn as fast as I can to one of the other readings. But some of the material I read for today's readings drew me to think again about what we're being told by the author of Revelation, who's usually identified as a man named John of Patmos. A little background here. Most commentaries would say that this book was written toward the end of the 1st century A.D., probably around 95 or so, and was intended to give comfort to followers of Jesus who were living in what is now Turkey, as they faced discrimination and oppression from the ruling Roman authorities. In other words, it was a time of trouble and unrest in that area of the world, and people were being persecuted for who they were and what they believed. Does that sound familiar? There are 2 points that really struck me as I read and thought about this reading. The first, which stands in contrast to the reading that some give to Revelation, is the question of who will be among the saved. Will only a handful of true believers be saved in the end? The passage immediately preceding this one might give that impression. In that passage, 12,000 people are marked out from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, 144,000 in all. So, will only 144,000 be saved? How many have heard that number somewhere before? Well, I read today's passage to say no. Instead, we find that the number comprises only a fraction of those who will be part of the coming kingdom. In the end, today's passage tells us there will be, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white with palm branches in their hands, a multitude that no one can count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages. What I read in that passage is that God reaches out to all the world, and that John promises a place to a varied and diverse throng. And what does that mean? Does that mean that the multitude might not all look just like us? Or find their prayer life embodied in the English of the Book of Common Prayer? Dare I suggest that it might mean that not all of the multitude will even understand God's revelation and salvation in the same way you and I understand them? That perhaps, just maybe, God has and will find ways to reach out to people in images and words different than those we know and love. Here in Revelation chapter 7, those who remain faithful witnesses despite persecution ultimately find reward and comfort in the presence of the one who is both lamb and shepherd. The great ordeal recedes into the past. Countless people from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, emerge praising God with songs and palm branches raised. Now, as idyllic as that scene is, we cannot forget that immense earthly suffering is the prequel. A heavenly vision of all nations joining in unbridled worship of God takes center stage, but that second act comes at the cost of the first act. Which brings me to the second thought that struck me as I pondered this reading. If we're honest with ourselves, most of us Western Christians will acknowledge that we are not persecuted for our faith. In fact, again, if we're honest with ourselves, living in Wheaton or one of its close neighbors, when we acknowledge our faith, we're most likely to get a smile and a nod. At most, if someone has had a really bad experience at a church, we might get a frown. Certainly nothing like persecution. But we need look no further than the news to find brothers and sisters who bear the cross of great suffering and seek shelter for the healing of their wounds. "Who are these and where have they come from?" asks the elder. Well, John of Patmos replies with appropriate humility, "Sir, you're the one that knows." We might in our day and time respond, "Sir, there are more than 4 million refugees from Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere in the strife-torn world. They're the brothers and sisters starving in camps cut off from humanitarian aid, the mothers and fathers risking their own lives and the lives of their children in order to flee certain death in a war-ravaged home. They're the toddlers slipping from the desperate grips of their families when overcrowded inflatable rafts capsize in the turbulent Mediterranean. They're the elderly being turned away from border crossings and toward despair. Sir, you're the one that knows." And lest we think of this as just someone over there, they're the people in detention waiting to be sent back, where families will be broken because mothers are not citizens, but children were born here. The photographs and the stories that chronicle the refugee crisis are oftentimes ones that I would rather not see or hear. They force me to put a human face on the violence and the suffering I would prefer to think does not exist. Yet, as with John's vivid revelation, the images in particular cut to the heart. When I look into the picture of the eyes of a refugee mother from whatever country, cradling her dehydrated infant, I meet there both the unmistakable gaze of the lamb being led to slaughter and the shepherd urging me to be his hands and feet in the world. The Christ who bids me do more than simply pray for his mother's provision. Her welfare is wrapped up in mine, and my welfare is wrapped up in hers. With each new heartbreaking scene, we are all, I believe, called to offer our prayer to the Good Shepherd to intervene, to bring about an end to the violence. Each of us also bears, however, the weight of the Lamb's indictment that our actions are not always as fervent as our prayers. As the crisis goes on and as the photographs continue to flood both the newspapers and our own consciousness, we cling to the tension inherent in the person of Jesus the Christ, who surely is the one who is both shepherd and lamb. Just this week, as Pope Francis and the Patriarch of Constantinople visited refugee camps in Greece to give witness to the suffering of people there, we are all reminded that these too are part of the throng from every nation and tribe and tongue. This reading from Revelation this week offers both a challenge and hope. The challenge is to understand it and see our place as being witnesses to Christ's love in the world for all of the multitude that no one could count from every nation, from all the tribes and peoples and languages. The hope is to those whose experience of hardship compels them to stand firm in the faith in God. As Revelation promises, they will hunger no more and thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, and God will wipe away every tear from their eye.